Thank you very much, Stephen. We start here this afternoon with just over 5 weeks to go before the BRICS Summit 2023 kicks off in Johannesburg. South Africa is confident that the gathering will be a major success. According to the latest data, BRICS countries represent 43% of the world's population, 16% of global trade, and more than 25% of the world's GDP, much bigger than the G7 bloc of nations. And if that doesn't go to show just how crucial this gathering is for South Africa's economic future, trade among BRICS countries has surpassed $1.4 trillion since 2019. For more on this work and what's being done in preparation for the summit, we are joined by Edward Kieswetter, the SARS Commissioner. Edward, thank you very much, Mr. Kieswetter, for joining us this afternoon. I want to start here because this was a tax and customs meeting that you were part of and leading, but you were recently elected chairperson of the World Customs Organization, and today's event around BRICS and customs is an important one. Let us in on the role played by customs in trade and having set out the ambitious program to improve trade facilitation between this bloc of nations.
Thank you, Kolani. And yes, the appointment as chair of WCO is indeed an important recognition of the leadership role that South Africa and specifically South African Revenue Service plays amongst the 185 member countries that form part of the World Customs Organization headquartered in Brussels. So indeed an honor and a privilege for us. Speaking specifically to BRICS, the 5 countries, we are meeting today and tomorrow as the heads of customs and specifically focusing on how do we use the customs function in each of these countries to enhance inter-country trade and thus facilitate economic growth within our countries and between our countries. You pointed out quite correctly that even though it's only 5 countries, it represents 43% of the population of the world and a quarter of the world's GDP. What is quite important, therefore, is that it is not insignificant. It also is a large chunk of the developing part of the world's population. What the role of customs is important, and you asked that question very specifically. Many people think of us just as collecting money, but actually customs has an important role, in addition to collecting duties and taxes, is to ensure that the integrity of our domestic economy is protected by ensuring that trade flows into the country is permissible, it is legitimate. We have, unfortunately, a proliferation of criminal syndicates who engage in all kinds of illegal activities and bring onshore, besides it not being properly declared for customs purposes, it also is harmful to the domestic economy. The second function, so the first is just to ensure the integrity of the domestic economy. The second is a facilitator of trade flows. And the more efficiently we can allow the passage of goods and services through our ports of entry, the lower the cost for business and the more efficient it reaches from the suppliers to the end-use customers, and that's good as an economic multiplier. And the third function is protection of society, because you will know we also very often intercept narcotics, illegal and unhealthy tobacco products, and thus our role is also the protection of society from harmful products and overall ensure the economic prosperity of South Africa. So that's the broad function of customs. Specifically focusing on the 2 days, we have an agreement in principle between the five countries that we will collaborate in at least 3 areas. Firstly, we will plan and conduct joint enforcement operations. Very often, the value chain between supply of the exporter and the importer on the other side is cross-national, and therefore we need to conduct enforcement operations over the entire value chain, and their collaboration is important. The second area of collaboration is to recognize each other's authorized economic operators. Those are accredited importers whom we regard as highly compliant, and we accredit them to have effectively a green lane experience. And then the third area is in the area of capacity building, where we can learn from each other how to build a level of proficiency amongst our customs officials. Those are the three areas. To enable those areas of collaboration, we are working hard to ensure a freer exchange of information between the five countries, because information is the gold that gives us the telltale signs of the trade flows, often to detect non-compliance. The second enabling mechanism is a mutual recognition agreement between countries, so that when we accredit an operator in South Africa, it is also recognized in one of the other countries. And the third ambition on our agenda is to ensure that there are mutual customs administrative agreements between countries and between the BRICS countries, which will create the legislative framework within which this cooperation can take place.
You've also mentioned recently now, actually, non-compliance, and we've seen how far the world has moved in making sure that the e-commerce and digital economy is appropriately taxed. There's an increase in e-commerce, in digital trade, and we've seen Europe and other regions trying to make sure that social media sites are actually paying their way. The technological advances make it very, very hard to actually, for any country, to ensure that those technology firms actually pay their way when it comes to taxes and customs as well. We know how that presents both a challenge as well as opportunities and risks for countries such as South Africa, but also for revenues and tax authorities. There are opportunities out there where South Africa could learn from the bigger players in BRICS.
Again, Kolani, and a reason why we should collaborate and cooperate. A tax and customs risk anywhere is a tax and customs risk everywhere. But let me also share with you firstly the positive is that South Africa already exacts VAT collection on electronic goods and services that are rendered by multinationals in South Africa. The area that is currently under discussion at the OECD is about the taxation of income from companies that are headquartered elsewhere in the world but have economic activity within South Africa. So the traditional nexus that gives a country taxing rights is physical presence or residency. Let me talk about physical presence because we are talking effectively about large international companies who may be headquartered in Silicon Valley, but they have a strong economic presence in South Africa or in any one of the other countries. So right now, the discussion is around how do we properly tax and align taxing rights to the digitalization of economic and business cycles. That is far advanced, and that will then also apportion some of the income tax that would otherwise accrue to a company, a multinational company where they are physically resident, will also distribute some of those taxes to countries where these companies may not be headquartered but are economically active. So the nexus for taxing rights is moving from physical presence to economic presence.
Something else that is quite important that you have actually mentioned today is around illicit trade. You've mentioned that the global financial integrity a report that at least $2.2 trillion is in illicit trade, and it becomes more frightening when you look at the fact that it is severely understated. Is there something that work that you are doing as heading this particular meeting around illicit financial flows in between the five blocks of countries? Is there work that can be done to limit or to stop the illicit activities that are clearly eating away at the prosperity of most of these countries?
Firstly, let me endorse the fact that you say the 2.2 trillion that we mentioned is probably understated because we don't know what we don't know. The three areas of cooperation that I referred to earlier on is in fact directed at helping us not only to facilitate legitimate trade, but also to detect and respond to illegitimate trade. So, for example, to do this, we increasingly require on data, and therefore the exchange of information between these countries are very important. On that, we can impose artificial intelligence, and increasingly AI is an important technology to help us to detect and respond to non-compliance. Within SARS, you've already heard how far advanced we are with the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. Then we also have to make sure if you're building a very sophisticated car, you also have to upskill those who drive the car. So capacity building is important. The customs officer and tax official of the future has to be able to work in a highly sophisticated environment. They need to have advanced skills, understanding how their work must be augmented by insights from data and artificial intelligence. And so we also have to upskill our customs officers more from manual facilitation and manual risk profiling to automated risk profiling using data and AI. So that's the second area of collaboration. And then to facilitate trade is increasingly to recognize and accredit honest brokers so that they don't get caught into the lane of the non-compliant and inadvertently are then given a bad experience. So it's very important for us increasingly to do knowledge work to be able to facilitate honest importers and traders, but at the same time to detect and to deter and, where necessary, enforce criminals and even companies who decide for any reason to try and duck under the law.
Commissioner Kieswetter, thank you very much for your time and giving us really the important parts of what is taking place at the BRICS Tax and Customs meeting and why it's so important for South Africa to actually ensure that it learns from the best and actually trades with the big players, the five block of nations now representing just over 25% of the global GDP and almost half of the world's population.